broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to AVPN August webinar on access to energy and its rippling impact on other sectors. My name is Kavita, and I'm the Manager Knowledge Center at the Asian Venture Philanthropy Network, India. AVPN is a unique funders network committed to building a high-impact philanthropy and social investment community across Asia. Currently, we have over 500 members across 29 countries, and we are very pleased to have two of our members based in India speaking today. Representing Dalberg, we have Malika Kirti, who is a consultant. She'll share with us the insights from the 2017-18 Global Off-Grid Market Trends Report on the rippling effects of access to energy. Following that, we have Ushnisha Ghosh, manager at Lean Data Acumen. Ushnisha will walk us through the insights that they have gathered through lean data to understand whether companies are meaningfully impacting customer lives. Over to you, Malika.
Thanks very much, Kavita. And thank you very much to every one of you for attending. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of Dalberg to present the 2017 and 18 Market Trends Report. We have, sorry, I'm just trying to understand the screen, Kavita. Do I have control of the screen?
Yeah.
Thank you. I think I have control, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I have control now. Thank you very much. So thanks, Kavita, and thanks to all of you for attending. I'm very happy to be here on behalf of Dalberg to talk about access to energy and the impact that it has on the lives of people. Dalberg has been following the off-grid solar sector for about 10 years now, and one of the ways in which we have engaged with the sector is through writing the Lighting Global reports, which are a biannual publication commissioned by the IFC's Lighting Global program and GOGLA. And our insights today derive from this report, as well as the broader work that Dalberg has been engaged with. I have 15 minutes to run through this presentation, and the way that I'm going to structure this is as follows. I'm going to spend a few minutes setting the context for what it is that we're talking about. What do we mean when we talk about the off-grid solar sector? And what is the impact proposition that this sector has to offer? Then I'm going to talk about the scale of impact that has been created, then talk about the nature that this impact has had, and then lastly, look at what the outlook has been for the future. Could we have the next slide, please, Kavita? And the next. Thank you. Till date, to begin with first, let me talk about what the context is. What exactly is the value proposition being offered by the sector? So first, to take a step back, let's understand who is it that we're talking about when we talk about impact. Who is it that this sector is impacting? It's impacting people who are either off the grid or have access to a poor quality grid. And what I mean by that is that people who do not have access to their traditional supply of electricity as transmitted through cables powered by a utility. Or even if they do have access to that, the quality of that access is quite poor with frequent power cuts and voltage fluctuations. And so within this setting, how does one cope with it? How does one carry on functions given these constraints? And what we see is that typically people resort to using kerosene or candles for lighting, or using fuel such as firewood for both lighting and cooking. And that has substantial negative impacts, as you can imagine, whether it is in the form of health repercussions or in the form of the time that it takes for households to go out in search of firewood, or in terms of the monetary impact on them, given that they have to buy kerosene frequently. In this context, this sector offers an alternative. It offers broadly two categories of products. One being a solar torch. Think of it as a solar lantern. Think of it as a torch that is powered by solar energy. It provides lighting and in some cases the ability to charge your phone as well. The other category of product is what we are going to refer to as a solar home system. Think of it as an inverter that you would have seen in households in India growing up in the 90s. And you still see today. This is powered by solar energy again, typically has a solar panel that is connected to a battery. These systems are larger and can hence power lighting for longer, and can also power appliances beyond light bulbs. And so typically you have a radio or a fan or even a TV that is being powered by these solar home systems. That is broadly the contours of the products offered by this. Till date, 600 million people have been impacted by the sale of these products. To put this number in perspective, that is twice the size of the United States of America. That is almost half the size of India's population. So this market the reach of this market is quite substantial. And when we talk about this market, we're talking about two different segments of products. There is one segment over which we have a lot of visibility because these suppliers have been helped by market building efforts such as IFC's Lighting Global program and GOGLA, and their products have gone through rigorous performance testing. And so we have a lot of visibility on what the quality of these products are. The second segment of the market is one that we have little visibility over. These are fly-by-night products, a solar torch that you could find in a local Kirana store that doesn't have a brand associated with it. We have less visibility over this. The quality of these products is highly variable. You could have a product that breaks within the next 2 or 3 weeks, or you could have one that lasts for 2 years. So this is really quite a diverse part of the market, but one over which we have less visibility than we do over what we call the quote-unquote affiliate market. The rest of this presentation is going to broadly focus on the impact created by the affiliates, but can be applied to the non-affiliate market as well, subject to some limitations. Next slide, thank you. Again, to really contextualize the 600 million number, it's important to first take a step back and really ask ourselves, when we talk about the off-grid solar market, how big is it exactly? And considering the number of people that either don't have access to the grid or have access to bad grid, we find that the total potential market for this segment could be around 434 million households. Until date, we have managed to cover about 17% of it. So a substantial gain, but also a large opportunity to capture a larger part of the market and to create even more impact. And this 17% number is really an astounding success story, considering the context of the markets in which this industry has grown. Next slide, please. If you compare it to the growth of other similar FMCG goods in the US market, you'll see that this growth is quite at par. So for example, take mobile phones. It took mobile phones 11 years to reach 10% penetration in US markets. Off-grid solar products have reached 10% penetration in 9 years. And these have operated in constraints that are not typically applicable to US markets, namely limited ability to pay, given that the target population is typically base of the pyramid. That's one. And the second is that the infrastructure in these markets is often constrained. So distribution networks, the regulatory environment can be challenges that are unique to this sector. So navigating these constraints, this has been quite a remarkable journey that the sector has undertaken. We talked about the scale. Next slide, please. Now let's move on to what is the nature of this impact. Next slide. I think very often we talk about whether people have access to energy or don't have access to energy. And I think one of the success stories here has been the ability to move the conversation beyond this binary and talk about what is the quality of energy that we're providing, to really move the conversation beyond just lighting to talk about access to energy, which provides services and functions to a household much beyond lighting. There is a move globally as well, led by the World Bank's SE for All program, to find a framework within which to capture this conversation. And what this framework does essentially is slot access to energy by the qualities. So along dimensions such as the duration of that access, the ability of that electricity supply to power appliances, the legality of that, etc. Next slide, please. If we are to map off the off-grid sector onto this framework, we find that most suppliers, the products supplied by most suppliers, fall within the first 3 tiers of this framework. What this means is that you will find products within the sector that are quite mainstream, that can give you energy or electricity for up to 8 hours, can power not only light bulbs, but can power radios, TVs, fans, and surprisingly, refrigerators as well. Next slide, please. And the story doesn't stop here. TVs have come into the market in the past 2 years and are becoming quite mainstream, but the sector is continuing to innovate. And some of the products that we're seeing that are not yet mainstream, but you see out there on the catalogs, is quite impressive. So not only do you have household appliances, such as an iron or a kettle that could be powered by a solar home system, but you also have appliances that can help you with income generation, such as a solar pump or a grain or a thresher that is powered by solar energy, which is quite substantial. Next slide, please. So this is great. I think so far we've talked about really the depth of energy that this sector has been able to provide. And so the next question is this still affordable? In moving from kerosene to candles to solar, can people still afford it? And the question is, the answer is broadly yes. So when looking at solar devices, we find this is a Dalberg analysis, says that 92% of the total potential market of those in off-grid or bad grid areas could afford a solar lantern. When talking about solar, larger solar home systems, there is really this superbly interesting innovation in the sector that is providing for affordability, because these systems, being larger, are also more expensive, as you would guess, given that they would also sometimes include a TV or a radio. And so if a typical system costs $100 or $120, you would think that this might be beyond the reach of a household in a semi-urban or a rural area that is in the lower quadrant of the income bracket. But what this innovation does is give the customer the options to pay in equal monthly installments, sometimes with a monthly upfront, sometimes with an upfront deposit, and sometimes without. And this has really increased people's ability to have access to larger products. if you just look at the second and the third bar, you find that with a cash payment of $25, you would be able to access a product that will provide you a single light and a mobile charger. Now, with PayGo, or with the provision for an equal monthly installment, the same amount of money can buy you a product that will last longer because it's bigger, that will give you longer access to electricity supply because it's bigger, that can light multiple bulbs, that can have a mobile charger, and increasingly, given the way the rapid pace at which technology is improving, they can also power TVs. So this is really something to watch out. This is really something to mark. It has been quite astounding. Next slide, please. Once the next slide, please, Kavita. Thank you. The one before that. Thank you. Once these products actually do reach the households, there is quite a lot of impact that is generated for the households along multiple dimensions. You have increase in savings because this is especially true of smaller systems, because you are saving in the cost of buying kerosene every month or buying candles every month. You are having improved health outcomes because you are no longer exposed to indoor air pollution that comes from lighting kerosene in your house. I think one study had estimated that having a source of kerosene light in your house is the same as smoking 170 cigarettes a day. The risk of accidents and fires also increase when you have an open flame, and these go down substantially when you bring in a solar light into your house. In addition, there is improved environmental outcomes because of reduced carbon dioxide that is generated by not using kerosene. Not just carbon dioxide, but also black carbon, which is a lot more lethal than carbon dioxide. And then with the larger systems that come with a radio or a TV, of course, you have improved access to information, and in some cases, the potential to greatly improve your income, not just through the appliances that you are getting, for example, the solar pumps or the grains that we talked about, but also increasing the footfall if you have a small shop by keeping it open for longer because now you have access to a light. These are impacts that can be felt at the household level, but there have been cases where this product is put to such innovative use that the impact can be felt a lot beyond the household as well. So for example, there is a company that is providing solar lights to maternal clinics in rural Ethiopia, which were incredibly constrained for infrastructure, did not have lights, and hence had quite a lot of negative outcomes, negative neonatal outcomes, including high neonatal births. And just providing something as simple as a solar light has helped reduce those negative outcomes. These are pilots, but they do have the potential to scale and really amplify the impact that this sector is having. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I think going forward, there are 3 points that I would like to make. The first point is that this impact is only going to grow because the sector is poised to grow. By 2022, we estimate that the number of products sold are going to more than double, which means that the scale of impact is going to increase as well. Now, with that increase in scale, there are 2 things we need to keep in mind. Next slide, please. The first is that we need to ensure that the success story or the story of impact of this sector continues to be positive. And what I mean by that is that we need to keep a sharp eye on negative externalities that could be caused by the sector. So for example, say by 2022, we have 400 million lanterns that would be sold, out of which many would begin to start phasing out, given that they would be nearing the end of their lives. So ensuring that we're not creating a waste problem or finding solutions in which we can recycle effectively to manage that waste problems, that's an opportunity for this sector to watch out for. Next slide, please. As the sector achieves even more scale, something to think about is how we measure impact. So far, the impact data that we have from the sector come from regional context specific studies and come from regional studies, and a lot of them are estimates, which create two challenges. One is that there are very few initiatives that are actually capturing end user data to tell us the story of impact. Acumen's Lean Data is one of those initiatives that is actually doing that, and we'll hear from them in just a little bit. And then the second is that there are few frameworks which can tell the story at an industry level. Acumen's Kat Harrison actually has been instrumental in trying to develop a framework like that. But as the sector increases, not just in scale, but also in the innovation of products, it's important to include as many more types of impact into that framework as possible. So for example, as the sector begins to move out of East Africa, which has an established mobile money presence, into areas that do not, is there a way that we can account for the fact that the sale of these products through equal monthly installments, where customers pay using mobile money, could be driving the adoption of mobile money in areas which typically don't have high usage of this? Is there a way for us to track if this is actually leading to higher financial literacy because you are imposing some kind of a financial discipline on customers by giving them a schedule of repayment? So these are some things for us to think about as we go forward and really pave the way for measuring impact that is both rigorous and broad and tells this story in an aggregated way at an industry level. Thank you.
Before we go on to the next presentation, I would like to inform the attendees that we'll be opening up the floor for the question and answers after the second presentation. Please feel free to use the console to type in your questions during the webinar, and I'll raise the questions to our speakers. If you have further questions that are not answered by the end of the webinar, you may email us at india@avpn.asia.
Hi, thank you for that, Malika and Kavita. I'm Moshna Shah. I'm part of the Lean Data team and mostly lead the work for India and Asia here. I'm really thrilled to be part of the webinar and really thrilled to be presenting some of the impact-related data and insights we have learned. Kavita, do I have the control? Or can you just go to the next slide? Thank you. Just to give you context, Acumen as an investment has been doing investing in this development sphere for 15 years, and specifically in unproven business models, which have been providing the low-income customers with access to life-changing goods and services, and affordability being one of the very key criteria for us. While we have been focusing on poverty alleviation for a long time, we are trying to recognize that there's a lot of impact which the climate change is having on these vulnerable customers. And hence, in next slide, please. 10 years back, Acumen also started investing in the energy sector companies and specifically trying to address the issue which we saw that is a missing piece here in terms of both access as well as the need of impact from these. Next slide, please. So far, since 2007, we have invested in 20 power, lighting, and cook stove companies and have overall impacted 81 million lives. And this is individual lives where we are talking about. So we have seen like $1 invested in these kind of companies have resulted to 4 lives. And in some cases, we've seen up to like 15 lives impacted. Quickly, just going to the next slide, we are spread across in terms of our investing in Africa as well as India and Pakistan. So you'll see that here, which includes both lighting power companies as well as cook stove companies. Next slide. So I think the most important part from taking away from what Malika was trying to talk about in terms of the development in the sector, what we have seen that, there are different types of products which are available. For example, our investments have been in solar lanterns and solar home systems, as well as many grid connections, like, for example, in companies like Dalberg and Husk, as well as improved cook stoves. What we have seen is that solar lanterns have the largest reach or the breadth which we have seen of impact. Next slide. But overall, the other portion which is really important for us to understand is the note around our portfolio, which we have seen significant amount of environmental impact. So this is one of the first types of impact which I'm trying to talk about here. So, the 18 million savings of like the carbon and black carbon emitting from the kerosene lamps, which are no longer in use, which has actually led to 6.4 million tons of CO2 and black carbon emissions averted, right? And this is almost like 1 million passenger vehicles driven for a year. So you can think about the compact impact which we are looking at the environmental scale. Going on to the next slide. So this is something which is interesting. So of course, these companies have been in existence for sometimes over a year to almost like 10 years. And what we have started to see, the sector has been evolving. There's a lot more financial money, both from the commercial side as well as the DFIs, such as World Bank, IFC, have started to put in money into these entrepreneurs who are trying to tackle this problem of energy access and quality. And hence, we are trying to also, we are also seeing a remarkable improvement in both in terms of the revenue growth as well as, from the exits we are seeing in this sector, which is, I would say, definitely an indicator of how this sector has been transformation lives, as well as actually proving that there was a need which is being met. Next slide, please. So given the context of where Acumen stands and the overall sector, which you heard from Malika, I think the other part which we were really interested in was that how do we learn more about the social impact being created by these companies and our portfolio as a whole. Next slide. So simply when we think about impact, for Acumen, we think about 3 pillars of impact. Poverty focus is one of our pillars because we really think that we are investing in a company, we are investing in a product and service because it does have a focus on reaching the poor customers. The second part is the breadth of impact. I think I discussed in the slides above that the 80+ million lives which are being impacted is what we call as the breadth of impact. The depth of impact, like how much and how do we really understand whether each of these people who have been impacted, how have their lives changed? And I think that's where we found that there was a lot of missing data, insights, and there was no common way of talking about it at a sectoral level. Next slide, please. And that's where we started to talk through our concept of what we call as lean data, which is what we say that we want to reach directly to the customers and try to gather both business and social insights through standardized surveys. And we use mobile and other technologies which are low cost, which can give us faster data. And typically all our projects and engagements with these companies have been done in 2 to 8 weeks time frame. What that has resulted in is that we have spoken to more than 50,000 customers, and these have resulted in a concept which we tried to do last year, which is the energy report. Can you go to the next slide, please? Which is the 2017 Lean Data Energy Report. For this particularly, we actually spoke to 21 of our energy companies, which were across 11 countries in Asia, as well as in Africa. There were 7,500 interviews conducted with 5,500 customers. And this is really important because, as Malika was mentioning, there is very little evidence and there is very little data out there, which is directly from the customer's mouth, right? And the way this project was structured, that we did a baseline survey within 3 months, up to 3 months of like buying a product or service, and then we did a follow-up after 6 to 7 months of their usage. Through this, we tried to understand and gather data where we wanted to keep some of this data very standardized. So what Malika was mentioning again, there is a GOGLA body which has its own indicators, which has standard indicators which we used, as well as we had our own lean data indicators which we tried to collect the data and information on. Next slide, please. What we tried to understand from our 3 pillars of impact, which I mentioned earlier, which was on the poverty focus, on the breadth of impact and depth of impact, we saw 73% of our energy customers are low-income customers. There is, according to the World Bank lines, poverty lines, we saw that 28 million of our customers were living on less than $3.1 a day. Next slide, please. This brings me to the point that we are looking at low-income customers who are buying these products. How do we understand whether there is changes in savings? What is the impact on finances for them? Interestingly, I'd like to bring in some really interesting points here, which is around the fact that if you see these, the chart here, you'll see there's a lot of the negative values which are for these companies, which are in this particular, whether they might be like mini-grid or they might be solar home system companies. What we observed is in the first year, once they switched to solar or they bought solar, there was not always a reduction of costs. There was a higher cost which they would have paid for solar. So hence, there was no immediate saving as such. What we also saw is that they did not immediately stop spending on kerosene or other sources of fuel, which might be like, just candles, etc. So hence, there is definitely a trend which we saw about, how much they are saving in the first few months of buying solar products versus how they would be saving in the years henceforth. And this is interesting because we are continuing to collect this information to try to understand these trends over a period of time. So there will be lateral studies where we follow the same customer over a period of time and see how do these savings actually change. On the other hand, when we looked at our improved cook stove companies, there were some immediate savings, and we could see that people found that the affordability there was much more. Next slide, please. So taking on another lens beyond just looking at who these customers are, the savings which they are having, there are some other aspects of impact which we also try to understand through these studies. So the first part was just around whether they were accessing such products and service for the first time, which seemed very transformational, that they did not have access to any such product earlier. What we also saw that there was an increase of the number of hours of light usage per day. And this was both due to the fact of having another product which was giving them light, and they were mostly using this in conjunction with what they were already using. Interestingly, we also found that through this report, we saw that there was an hour of extra study time which we found that people reported. But here again, I would like to talk about a couple of other I would say aspects which are not on this slide, is that we saw that we have done, except this report, we have also done studies with one of our companies in India, where we tried to understand if extra usage or extra light led to extra hours of study. Did that finally result in any changes in education outcomes? And we did a similar study also in Zambia. And interestingly, we found sometimes very different results. So increased hour of study time did not always result in increased, I would say, education outcome. And that does not mean that there was no impact, but rather that meant that there were other contextual factors such as whether it was the time the student actually had to study, whether it was sickness, or even around affordability of things which they needed for better education outcomes. The point I'm trying to make here is that I think it's important for us to look at how much we know about the linkages between what we have from increased light at home to the final outcomes, which might be education-related outcomes or even health-related outcomes. What we also saw, of course, what you see on the slide, which is around the fact that there was a safety-related impact which was felt. And we see that in the case of cook stoves, that was a little less dramatic. There was a lot more impact which we saw with our customers who were buying lighting products. Next slide, please. The other interesting part, which was from this study, which we tried to focus on, was actually challenges. And again, this is really important because as you see, the usage of a product has to be sustained, has to be for a period of time to have impact. And this is what we saw, that across all the customers we spoke to, almost 26% of these customers did have some type of challenge. And this also we saw as an important indicator to track and understand as we grow our portfolio, as we invest in more companies and the companies grow, in terms of how they are tackling the challenge to have better depth of impact. Going on to the next slide. Can you go to the next slide? So here, I'm just going to give you a quick brief about what you're going to see in the next two slides is a small spider chart. So just to understand the spider chart at the level where we are looking at the shaded portion, which is lesser impact than the Acumen's benchmark, and which is beyond that will be the positive impact beyond Acumen's benchmark. Next slide, please. So here we just wanted to, again, I just wanted to share an example from our lighting companies where you see that from company 1 and company 2 has a different level of impact which they are finding. So in company 1, you see they're sort of underperforming on study hours and they're underperforming on daily light usage. But on the company 2, they're overperforming on increased light hours and income generation. Why this is important is as we contextualize and know more about the impact created for each of these company customers, it's really interesting to see which facet of impact is really being done by, say, a solar lamp company versus how it's different for a solar grid company. And this is our first initial study. We are also continuing to do this over a period of time to see how these graphs actually move and change over a period of time. Next slide, please. Again, so I think this is for cook stove. We try to see how is it different for each of these cook stove companies. So for example, in company 10, we see that there's good impact across all dimensions. On the other hand, we saw that company 12 is sort of outperforming on like no stacking, as in there is no, lesser number of, people who are doing stacking on the newer cook stoves with the older cook stoves. Next slide, please. Here we see that, overall, if we ask the same questions, which I was talking about, that we did ask similar questions from the Gogla indicators, and we had our own lean data indicators, it really starts to give us these benchmarks and how has somebody's quality of life changed because of the product and service. And then we can start comparing and actually understanding who is having more impact and why. And this becomes very important as the sector is growing, as we are seeing newer products and services, which I think Malika was also trying to mention that is coming into the sector. Then how do we know we are progressing and we are actually having better impact? Next slide, please. And overall, bringing this all together, we are also trying to see how do these companies move from a validation stage to a scale. And we seem to be trying to understand with this kind of impact data that how do we know that at a overall portfolio level, how are these moving with both financial performance as well as the impact performance. Next slide, please. These things which what I would like to leave the audience with is that we realize that there needs to be a better support for our companies, and finally which will lead to better investment and capital flows into this sector, and specifically be able to demarcate what is the low impact and how is some company having a higher impact. So going ahead, next slide, we are betting big on solar, but we know there will be newer use cases of solar, which might be productive use cases. How do we understand affordability and over-indebtedness? And how do we keep on, doing benchmarking on impact and continuing to learn? That is all from my side. I would like to thank you, AVPN, for the chance to share some of the insights from the studies. Thank you.
The floor is now open for audience questions. There's one question for Mallika. The question is, it sounds like the industry suppliers are what you could call social businesses. The first part of their mandate, impact, seems to be on way to being established. Is the other mandate being met as well? Are these businesses profitable or viable?
Hi, Kavita. Can you hear me?
Yes, Mallika.
Okay, yeah, that's a great question. And I think Ushnisha's last graph was really a good indicator of that, showing how companies are moving on both the scale of social impact as well as financial performance. The short answer to your question is that there are some companies within this sector that are profitable. They have reached profitability, but their share within the broader market is quite low. That is not to say that there is not a pathway to profitability. Given the diversity of business models within the sector, there are quite a few different, very promising pathways to profitability that investors can be quite optimistic about. And within the next 2, 3, or 5 years, we will be beginning to see quite a few more companies begin to break even.
The next question is for Ushnisha. Is it important to understand the gender aspect of energy impact and its rippling effect? If yes, how do we measure and track it?
Thank you. It's something which we have started to recognize after we did the first report, that it's really important to see the dynamics of how these products have been used by different people in the households, who actually takes decisions on whether the product is bought, because these have started to have an impact on how long these products have been used, and even to the point of us seeing that if there are financing available for these products, how people are actually repaying this. So at different points of this customer journey, we have definitely seen a need for us to see the gender aspect and track that, and also measure that over a period of time.
There's time for only one more question, and this question is for Mallika. When you talk about the non-affiliates, it sounds like the market is moving towards commodification. Is that the case? And if yes, what is driving it?
Another great question. Thanks, Kavita. The answer is yes. We see one part of the market that is moving towards commodification, which is the solar lanterns part. And so you have quite a few products out there in the market that you will find stocked just as you would find stocked, say, any other torch or a CD player in a store. And I think part of it is the natural progression of a market. If you look at other markets as well, you see that the pathway for products is often led by 1 or 2 companies or 1 or 2 brands, but then you have a whole influx of other companies that are following that product design into the market. I think in this particular situation, there have been a few factors that have helped that influx. Namely, one is just the incredible amount of improvements in technology, specifically within the LED technology that is the light bulbs used within these products that are making it possible for factories a lot of these companies are based out of China, and so the technology has become so much cheaper and so much better that it is actually quite cost effective for a supplier of other fast moving consumer goods that are say also manufacturing Christmas lights or toys to also manufacture solar lanterns within their portfolio. That's one factor, which is the technology. The second factor is the increasing amount of trade between China and Africa. I think we see suppliers and distributors really capitalizing on the overall macroeconomic trend to move solar products into the market. When we were doing interviews for this report, we had somebody talk about the Yiwu phenomena, which is essentially you have distributors of goods go into the city in China called Yiwu and pick up products, all different kinds of products. And among the products that they pick up are solar lanterns, which they then bring back and then infuse into the traditional distribution channels that reaches the end customers. So I would say those are the two main drivers for this trend.
So Ushnisha, if you can quickly answer one last question, which rippling effect of energy is most important to the consumer, and how do you find and think about that?
So because we have done this study only once, I think we will wait to see how people are reacting and talking about different aspects. But I think as you will see in our slide, which I shared, there's definitely a lot of, evidence which we see about them feeling safer. And also the fact that they are having improvement for energy quality itself. So for example, because they are having 71% of our customers said that they are having access to the modern energy service itself for the first time. I think that itself was one of the key improvements for their life. And we do hope to be able to say in say the next 3 years that which one, whether it's health, whether it's productive use of lighting, which starts to be the front runner of the impact.
Thank you, Ushnisha, and thank you very much, Malika. And thank you everyone for your participation in the interesting session. We'll post a webinar recording on our website by next week. Please look out for it. Also, AVPN India Summit will be held on 6 December 2018 in New Delhi, India, which will bring together a diverse group of funders and resource providers from around Asia on one platform for multi-sector collaboration and knowledge sharing. The early bird registrations for the conference are now open. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, Kavita. Thanks for putting it together.
Thank you.